All right, guys, last one. You did it. This is also one of those. This is one of those topics where I really wish we were in person because this is good stuff, and it's sad to not be able to have discussions with you about these things. I mean, that's the case for everything. Obviously, I miss it a lot, but especially here, really kicking myself while I was making this, just about how unfortunate the situation is. But that being said, we still got a job to do. Let's take care of it. So our last topic is political polarization. So another relevant quote here is, another thing that all Americans can agree on, the other guys are wrong. And I think oftentimes we hate the other guys more than we like ours, right? And that's certainly the case with political polarization. So in today's America, there is a larger divide between Republicans and Democrats than there has ever been in American history. And that's true. That's a fact. You can measure that by public opinion. And I'll show you some data in a moment. And these two parties are moving further away from one another ideologically. That is called political polarization. So your definition of the title part of this video, the two parties are moving further away from the other ideologically. They agree on very little. What they do agree on is that the other guy is wrong, though, right? This part is not necessarily going to be on your AP test, but I do want to kind of explain why this is the case. Because I think just saying it, showing you some data and moving on doesn't necessarily do my job very well. So this is essentially the problem. So the main divide between Republicans and Democrats today is the tension between political correctness and cancel culture. And maybe you're aware of these things, maybe you're not, maybe you participate in them, maybe you don't. We'll go over definitions in a moment. But Democrats tend to support political correctness and cancel culture, both of which Republicans tend to detest. And because of that tension, the two parties are moving further away. Political correctness is, here's your definition. It's not on your sheet because, again, it's not something you need to know for the AP test, but I do want to define it so you know what I'm talking about. Political correctness is basically the expectation that candidates avoid any kind of expression or action that can be perceived to exclude or insult or marginalize any group or person who has historically been discriminated against. And cancel culture is the result of political correctness, and that is the expectation that those who are not politically correct are punished by society in the form of removal from power. For example, if someone says a slur, a lot of people, especially Democrats, would argue that that person should be fired from their job, or if they're a candidate, they should be removed from committee assignments and things like that. They should be punished in some way. That's what cancel culture is. And here's the data I was talking about to prove that. So the median, meaning the middle, right? So where the average person would be. So in '94, the median Democrat and the median Republican were very similar. They could agree on a lot of things, and bills were passed much more easily. Compromise was possible. But as you can see, the Democrats have moved much further to the left, and the Republicans have moved a little bit further to the right. But the Democrats' shift to the left is because of that expectation for political correctness and that expectation of upholding politicians to that standard, oftentimes the politician not meeting that standard is a Republican, which would then piss off Republicans, further causing political polarization. Also, some statistics. The Republicans are shifting more to the right, the Democrats are shifting more to the left. On the right side of the screen here, you can see the most recent data that's taken on this. In 2014, 92% of Republicans would be considered more conservative than the median Democrat, and 94% of Democrats are more liberal than the median Republican. So if you put these two things together, that shows a very divided America. Political polarization is not all good either. It's not all bad. Depends on who you ask. We'll talk about it in a second. So political polarization leads to gridlock, and gridlock is definitely a term you need to know. Gridlock means that it is difficult to pass a law because the two sides cannot compromise. And the further we move away from each other, the less we are able to compromise. Now, depending on who you ask, that's either a great or a terrible thing. And it's up to you to make your opinion. I mean, you've read both documents. In Fed 10, James Madison talks about how gridlock is fantastic. Opposite factions arguing with one another and forcing compromise is what makes the system work. That's what he says. On the other hand, you've got the anti-federalists in Brutus 1 arguing that gridlock is terrible. They say that government should work to benefit the people, and therefore it should work quickly. And gridlock obviously means not quickly. So, depending on who you ask, gridlock is a good or a bad thing. Most Americans view it as a bad thing, but most Americans also participate in causing political polarization, which causes gridlock. So, we're all part of the problem, and nobody is working to fix it. Generally speaking, when political polarization happens and when things get, too extreme, the political parties go through realignment. Let me jump back to this map real quick, or graph, or whatever this is. I'm not quite sure what this is. It's just a figure. But anyway, look on the left here. The purple part is the middle. It's the independents. As you can see, in 94, the independents were much closer to the median Democrat and the median Republican. Now, the independent voter is very far away from the median Democrat and the median Republican. So sometimes when things get too crazy, the parties will realign. They'll go through what is called political realignment. So a party will have a major shift in its party platform and therefore its electoral base. And usually this happens when a party loses an election that they expected to win. They would do this in order to basically gain back a chunk of those independent voters. They're independent for a reason. They don't necessarily buy into the Republican or the Democrat label. But generally speaking, independents tend to kind of lean one way or the other. And as long as the candidate isn't terrible, they'll probably vote for them. But when things get too crazy, independents have nowhere to go because the Democrats, to them, are too far left and the Republicans are too far right and they don't have a home. Third parties would normally be the answer, but third parties have no chance because if they have a good idea, their idea is stolen and only one person can win. So a third party has this huge barrier to entry. So the independent voter is stuck. And unless the party realigns, it changes its ideas, it changes what it stands for, and moves back to the middle to get those independent voters, they're going to stay stuck. So political realignment happens, generally speaking, when the party reevaluates itself. They're like, dang, we just lost. Things aren't going well for us. We need to change. That's political realignment. I just said that. Oh, geez. Okay, my bad. But basically, parties do this to reach a perceived larger voter base so they can win future elections. I already said that. I should have put it on the screen. I didn't. My bad. So another big source of tension is a term that you need to know for your AP test, and that is affirmative action. We're going to talk a lot about affirmative action here. Here's your definition. Affirmative action is the practice of favoring individuals belonging to groups that have been discriminated against in the past, and then passing laws to benefit those groups. If you put this together with political correctness and you put this together with cancel culture, affirmative action kind of fits the mold a little bit of today's political culture in general. If Democrats, and again, I'm speaking in general terms, not all Democrats are like this, but if Democrats tend to expect that everybody goes out of their way to make sure that they don't potentially insult any marginalized group, if that's their attitude, and then you have affirmative action, which is passing laws that benefit historically marginalized groups, there becomes this divide between Democrats and Republicans on the issue. Republicans would associate affirmative action with political correctness for that reason. Therefore, affirmative action has officially become controversial. In the past, it wasn't necessarily as controversial as it is today, but affirmative action is a very hot topic now because it falls right into line with the things that divide us the most, and that's race. America is a diverse place. I will say this though, most Americans have 4 similar core values. You do need to know these for your AP test, and we're going to deconstruct these in a second. First off is the rule of law. We already went over it, and I know I already put it on the sheet, but damn it, we're going to do it again. The rule of law means that no one is above the law. No one can do whatever they want, and no matter if you are the president of the United States or if you are a guy who has not left his classroom other than to sleep in 3 days. Whatever the case may be, you can't break the law and get away with it. That's what the rule of law means. The pursuit of happiness is also something you're probably familiar with. You can do what you want as long as you don't hurt anybody else. Again, these are the things that most, if not all, Americans tend to believe in. Free enterprise is a core American value as well, although I think it's a little bit less popular today than it was in the past, and that is that businesses should be free of unreasonable government control. Businesses should fail or succeed on their own merit, and the government should generally stay out of their business. And lastly, equality of opportunity. This is what the American dream is rooted in, and that is that everyone should have an equal chance to succeed. And this last one is what I really want to focus on when it comes to our conversation about political polarization. Equality of opportunity is a hot topic because equality of opportunity does not mean equality of outcome. And how do we reach one without the other? That's the fine line that nobody seems to be able to walk. And that's where affirmative action comes in. And again, remember, that's laws that are passed to benefit historically marginalized groups. Democrats tend to see affirmative action as a means of equality of opportunity. If these guys have been historically marginalized, then why don't we help them out so that way they can get on the same playing field as everybody else. That's the theory that they would have. Whereas the Republicans would tend to see affirmative action as a means of equality of outcome. The government is going out of their way to try and create an outcome for a person that has not necessarily worked for it. And that is not fair to everybody else who is working hard. That would be their argument. So this dichotomy between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome, affirmative action is the center of the conflict. And this further leads to political polarization. And on top of that, does affirmative action conflict with the pursuit of happiness is another question that nobody really has a great answer for. And remember, the pursuit of happiness is the ability to do what you want as long as it's not impacting anybody else in a negative way. If affirmative action is helping out historically marginalized people, then isn't that at the expense of everybody else? I don't know. I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, but you're not in this room with me. But that's a very real source of conflict in America today. If one person succeeds, does that mean that another person has to fail? And if so, if you're helping that person succeed, does that mean that you're helping that person fail? I don't know. Here's a few examples of affirmative action, and these are all very real and all very relevant. I also want to spoil this by saying none of them are working very well. And in fact, almost all of them are illegal now. That does not stop the Democrats from trying, though, I will say that. So following the death of George Floyd was killed very recently. I'm sure you heard about it. It was in the news. And he was killed by a police officer after he was arrested for allegedly using a counterfeit bill. And the police officer, not to get too graphic with you, but he essentially put his knee on George Floyd's neck for an extended period of time. And George Floyd said, "Hey, stop." And the police officer did not. And George Floyd was killed in an entirely preventable, senseless, Anyway, he was killed and he shouldn't have been. Therefore, police stations across the country instituted implicit bias training. And implicit bias training is essentially the insinuation that people are subconsciously racist. And officers were mandated to go through this training to show them that they likely perceive Black and white Americans differently. And if you look at the statistics, Black people are killed by police officers unnecessarily often. And white Americans are not. Therefore, something is wrong. Implicit bias training was instituted to show officers that you're part of this. You are a victim of subconscious racism. However, the insinuation that people may be subconsciously racist created public outrage. And if you think about what we've already discussed, that makes a lot of sense. If you think about political correctness and the stigma that the Democrats have created around racism, it's not acceptable if you say the N-word and you're not Black, for example. That might have been fine in America 15 years ago. It's not today. It's not okay to use gay as an insult. That might have been fine in America 15 years ago. It's not today. because racism is this word that is thrown around in this country all the time now, the insinuation that people are racist on accident, like you can't even help being racist, you just are. That's the theory here. Pissed off a lot of people. And because of that, President Trump signed an executive order that banned public institutions from using implicit bias training. So affirmative action in this case failed, further contributing to political polarization. Example number 2, college admissions. I'm not going to be as emotional about that one. Okay. Sorry, I need a minute. So, in the early 2000s, public colleges and universities had diversity quotas that they had to meet each year when they were getting college applications in. They had to have X amount of African Americans, they had to have X amount of Latinx folks, X amount of Asian Americans, so on, when they were accepting people. And the theory behind that was that a diverse college campus would benefit everyone, because people from different walks of life would naturally have classes together, and they would have conversations, and everyone would learn from each other, and everyone would be happy, fun, great. That was the theory. However, this ended up leading to minority applicants getting accepted over white counterparts who happen to have identical test scores and GPAs, right? Let's say, my diversity quota for African Americans is not filled yet, and I've got, dude over here that has a 30 on the ACT and a 4.0 GPA, and then I got dude over here that has a 30 on the ACT and a 4.0 GPA, but one of them black and one of them's white, and I can only take one of them. They're going to take the black guy so they can not only have a qualified person, right? They were both qualified, but if they can only take one, you're going to take the qualified person who can also fit your diversity quota. That pissed off a lot of white people. So some states began banning affirmative action quotas in public college admissions. Many lawsuits happened, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of the states banning affirmative action quotas. This made affirmative action quotas illegal unless they are federally mandated. So again, in this case, affirmative action failed, further contributing to political polarization. In this case, I would love to have this discussion with you. I wish I could. Is this manufacturing equality of outcome? Is this equality of opportunity, or is it equality of outcome? I don't know. If you earned admission, you should probably get it. If you only have room for a certain amount of people, you got to pick somehow. But on the other hand, should anyone not get admission because of their skin tone? I don't know. I would love to have this discussion with you. I'm looking forward to the Zoom where we do. Example number 3, and this will be our final one. The NFL's Rooney Rule. So this is a private company, right? These other ones, they were public institutions. You had a police force and you had public colleges. I just wanted to put this one on here to show that private businesses also use affirmative action. It is totally legal for them because they are private businesses. They can do what they want. The NFL's Rooney Rule requires all teams to interview at least one minority candidate when they're hiring a new coach. Despite this rule, there are only 3 black head coaches in the NFL. The NFL is 75+% black. That's the theory behind the Rooney Rule in the first place. Why should we have all these white guys out here ordering all these black guys around? Isn't that a little slavery-ish? So this got put into place And the theory was this is not manufacturing equality of outcome because they're not forced to hire the minority candidate. It's equality of opportunity because they're forced to interview the candidate. There have been over 20 head coaching vacancies in the last 3 years. There were 7 head coaching vacancies this offseason. 1 minority coach was hired, and that's it. Affirmative action does not always lead to equality of outcome. The question is, should it? And I will leave you with that. The answer is, I don't know. But maybe you do, and I'm looking forward to hear your thoughts. Congratulations on making it through the entire AP Gov vocab marathon. It is time to study. You have a test. Good luck.